West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I want to start with the special counsel's investigation into January 6th because there was some news this week. The New York Times is reporting that prosecutors have questioned multiple witnesses in recent weeks, including Jared Kushner. What does that indicate to you about where they are in the investigation and what charges it may bring?
It seems like they're zeroing in on the question of what exactly Donald Trump knew and what he believed. There were a lot of indications we got during the January 6th hearings that he knew he had lost the election. And if they can nail that down with some witnesses, that will solidify his culpable intent.
Yeah, Jared Kushner said he didn't know he lost, it seems, in the reporting, which seems to me, that sounds like you're a little skeptical of that.
Well, Cassidy Hutchinson told us that he said, "Can you believe I lost to this guy?" So when he was behind the scenes, it was perfectly clear. There are also a series of administrative steps that he took for the government, indicating that he knew that there was going to be a succession of power. And he knew it was really over, while he was saying on the other side to the mob, we're going to stop this and, we're going to reclaim it and so on.
What unanswered questions do you have from the investigation, given how deeply you were embedded in this for Special Counsel Jack Smith, that you hope he will answer?
There are a number of formal parts of the investigation that I wish we had had more time and more resources to go after. For example, we knew that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were acting as the frontline shock troops to attack the officers and to try to unleash the wrath of the mob against anybody who was protecting us and to storm the Capitol. We know that they were acting in a very organized fashion, but we didn't have all of the specific conversations and communications that took place. And obviously, they tried to guard them
between the Oath Keepers and
the people at the top.
Now, the Department of Justice, it's been reported that they had a strategy of waiting on launching a more aggressive investigation into Donald Trump himself because they wanted to focus on the Oath Keepers and others around him. That has, by all accounts, delayed the process, meaning that it could go post-election. How concerned are you about that, and how do you feel about their strategy to focus on the Oath Keepers first?
Well, it seems to me that they've proceeded the way that prosecutors like to proceed in an organized crime investigation. You start with the smallest fish, and then you work your way up. You get them to flip or to testify as to the people who are above them until you get to the very top. And that's how a lot of the Godfather prosecutions work. And it seems like they were following that principle. I mean, the difference here, of course, is that so much of Donald Trump's incitement and coordination of these events took place in plain view.
Donald Trump is also calling for an indefinite delay before he goes to trial. His lawyers are, I should say, in the classified documents case. And Special Counsel Jack Smith's prosecutors argued strongly against any delay. Is there any valid argument for a delay?
I don't think that there should be any delay in an existing prosecution. Otherwise, any criminal defendant in the country would declare for president or Senate or House or mayor and say, you can't prosecute me anymore. You got to wait till next year or the year after. Think of it this way. If somebody is running for office and then is implicated in a murder or a rape or an armed robbery, would we say, no, we're going to hold that until after the election, if in the normal course of events it would take place before? He should be treated exactly the way anybody else would be treated in the same situation. There have been hundreds of prosecutions of people on the basis of crimes that took place on January 6th. Why should he be special?
There is some reporting that some of Trump's advisors have been blunt in private conversations, that he is looking to win the election to protect himself by issuing a self-pardon.
Yeah.
How concerned are you about the precedent, about the legality, about every aspect of it?
As with so many things relating to Donald Trump, it's what we call a case of first impression. Nobody knows because nobody's ever pushed the limits like this before. No president has ever been in a situation where he's had to think about pardoning himself, much less essentially promising to pardon himself. But, James Madison said in the Federalist Papers that the cardinal principle of justice in our system is that no man may be a judge in his own cause, in his own case. And so it does seem to cut against that very basic principle. Again, he pushes our legal system to the extreme, and we are forced to judge these very radical concepts that have never been tested before. But I think there's at least as good an argument that the president cannot pardon himself as the idea that he can.
Do you think that's what he's up to?
Well, I certainly believe that he's trying to use his candidacy and his campaign as a shield against legal prosecution.
Given Trump hasn't been held accountable yet, it's in process in some ways, and he clearly hasn't changed his behavior much. What concerns you the most about what he could do to subvert the next election?
Well, a lot of it we're seeing in plain sight right now. There are efforts to change election laws all over the country where Trump-loyal Republican Party legislative leaders are trying to engage in voter suppression tactics, other efforts to undermine the ability to get a fair count in the election. We saw what they tried to do with the independent state legislature doctrine, which so far has not worked on the Supreme Court. The idea that the state legislatures essentially can do whatever they want with respect to elections.
I want to ask you about the work of the Oversight Committee, because you and Congressman Dan Goldman sent a letter to Oversight Chair James Comer this week requesting that he hand over any information he's received from Gal Luft, the man who the GOP claimed, in case people haven't been following this in detail, had evidence of corruption by the Biden family and who was charged with arms trafficking, sanctions violations, and acting as an unregistered agent for China. It's almost like a part of a movie that is happening right now, according to an indictment unsealed this week. What questions, what information are you seeking about James Comer's involvement with Luft, and what do you really want to know?
Well, look, Gal Luft was supposed to be the star witness in arraigning Joe Biden on the old Giuliani charges of a fake Ukrainian bribery scandal. And it turns out that Luft was missing, as Chairman Comer kept saying. The reason he was missing is because he's a fugitive from justice. He's on the run around the world away from the U.S. government. And this was going to be the star witness against Joe Biden. And what I'm afraid has happened, Jen, is that the Trump party has created such a topsy-turvy world that we're getting real low-life characters like George Santos, like Donald Trump, like Gal Luft, who say, I think I'm going to be able to launder all of my crimes and wrap myself in the protection of the Republican Party.
Of people they could go after to help them.
That's right.
And so how concerned are you that James Comer was the chairman of the committee, was knowingly, unknowingly working with, co-opted by a foreign agent?
I'm just concerned that the House Oversight Committee, which has a very proud history with, Congressman Waxman as chair, the great Elijah Cummings of Maryland as chair, is suddenly being compromised in a really serious way. Our legitimacy is being eroded by the tactics adopted by Chairman Comer. They essentially have said, we will validate anybody who will say anything about the Bidens. And of course, they haven't laid a glove on President Biden. There are real issues that are confronting our people, and they're off on this wild goose chase related to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And their main witnesses are people who are fleeing justice in America.
I wanted to quickly ask you about Fox News, because there was a defamation lawsuit filed by Ray Epps against Fox News after the network and former host Tucker Carlson repeatedly claimed Epps was an undercover FBI agent who helped provoke the insurrection at the Capitol. As a constitutional lawyer, an expert, somebody who knows this case deeply, how strong do you think Epps's defamation case is?
Well, I think it's a very strong case. In the United States of America, which has the First Amendment, it's very hard to prove defamation against someone. Very hard. You've got to prove that they intentionally lied or were so reckless about the truth that they ended up essentially disparaging your character in a damaging way. And even with that very strict, narrow standard, the Dominion Company was able to win a settlement out of court with Fox News. So he saw how Dominion beat Fox News, and he decided, I'm going to do the same thing. They have basically libeled him, they have slandered him, they have defamed him by saying that he would lie about who he was when he was one of their supporters. He's on their side. And that's one of the things that never ceases to amaze me, the way that they turn on their own supporters and devour them. I hope that he's not just in it to defeat them legally, but he's in it to arrive at a political epiphany about what kind of authoritarian movement he associated with. That is the pathway to redemption for America. When people begin to recognize that they were acting like members of a religious cult. Unfortunately, there's still millions of people doing that, and a lot of them are in Congress right now.
Now, House Republicans have passed a defense spending bill that limits abortion access, transgender care, and diversity training for military personnel. The controversial legislation was approved on Friday, primarily along party lines. This after the far-right Freedom Caucus pushed to include amendments on major social issues. Democrats then accused Republicans of turning what's usually a bipartisan bill into a culture war. The legislation is now headed to the Senate, where it's certainly expected to fail. Here's what House Speaker Kevin McCarthy had to say about that.
Just focus on the military. Stop using taxpayer money to do their own wokeism. A military cannot defend themselves if you train them in woke. We don't want Disneyland to train our military. We want our men and women in the military to have every defense possible. And that's what our bill does. The money focuses directly on their quality of life and, more importantly, on the investment.
Now, Republicans are specifically defending an amendment passed in the House's annual defense spending bill last week that blocks the Pentagon from covering the expenses for women in the military who need to travel out of state to have an abortion procedure. Here's what Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, as well as Congressman Michael McCall of Texas, had to say yesterday about that measure.
Shouldn't all troops, regardless of where they're stationed, get the same treatment? Like, why penalize them for living in Texas?
Well, they're free to travel to another state to have.
They'd be penalized. They'd have to take
an abortion, just not taxpayer expense.
They'd have to take the time off and the like, and so that would impact their ability to do their jobs, arguably, right? If they have to go on leave.
The military should not be paying for abortion tourism.
So what should women who are in uniform in a place where they cannot access abortion because they are there on orders, what should they do?
Well, if they want to take that step, they have 30 days of annual leave. It shouldn't be taxpayer funds giving them 3 weeks of paid, uncharged leave.
So, Allie, let's talk about the mechanics of this. Passed last week, as noted, likely to go down in the Senate. We heard Kevin McCarthy talk about wokeism. Where is this going, and what are the real-world implications of suddenly this bill being in real jeopardy?
I mean, look, this is typically something that is bipartisan in nature. And you look at the way that it came out of committee, I think it was like 58-1 or something very bipartisan like that. It's something that I asked the speaker on Friday why he thought you watched this shift from going from something that was very bipartisan to basically passing along party lines. There were a few exceptions, some of them frontliners in tough districts for re-election next year. But look, I mean, I think it speaks to the current mindset of this House Republican conference. Now, we know, because we watched this dance be done with the debt ceiling battle, that the first pass at this out of the House Republican Conference is not the thing that ultimately gets passed in the end. But there are a lot of changes that are going to be made here between this House version and what the Senate is ultimately going to take up. And I think what's going to be important here is some of the promises that McCarthy may have made to get members of his conference on board here in the first place. The fact that, for example, he's now got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who he promised a spot on the conference committee for this bill. That means that she's going to be one of the folks who's in the room and actually helping to hammer out what this ultimately looks like. I think that's going to be really important. The other thing I'm looking for, too, is the way that this abortion issue, which really did start with Senator Tuberville in the Senate, him holding up those military promotions until the Pentagon changes the policy you were just talking about. It seems like he's struggling for an off-ramp a little bit. I know when he was talking to one of our NBC colleagues last week, he seemed to say that he would back down on this maybe if there were a vote. He's changed sort of the way that he's talked about this over the last few weeks. Again, it sort of looks like he's looking for some kind of an off-ramp. I'm wondering if that's one of the things that comes to fruition as they're conferencing out what this NDAA might look like. But I think more than anything, this is instructive of not just the battle that we're looking at right now on the military and how Congress is going to tell the military they can use their funds, because that's what this is, but then the later funding bill itself on spending coming in the fall and whether or not we're going to go to a government shutdown. Each of these battles, debt ceiling, now NDAA, all of that is instructive for what's ahead.
Rev, in the clips we just played, it's impossible not to be struck by the callousness of the two Republican lawmakers while talking about this. Senator Cotton used the phrase abortion tourism. Just give us your sense as to just like how he is portraying an issue that is so difficult and so central to so many women put in a situation where now, I mean, they're being political pawns.
To really minimize the impact of a woman's decision to have or not have an abortion, to try and act like this is some excursion, like you're going on a vacation spot or something, shows the callousness, you use the right word, of the right wing in these particular arguments. This is not tourism. This is basic decisions that take a lot of real gut-wrenching decisions to make. And then to try and use the fact that this country needs to have its defense at all times on alert. I mean, we have battles going on all over the world, Ukraine, etc. And we're going to play these culture wars in the middle of a time that recruitment is down. It shows you that they have no boundaries to try and moralize. And Susan, I think that you from your perch watching all of this, I mean, there's really no place I can remember in recent history where we've seen this kind of moral majority from the older days even try to interfere with military strength and military recruitment to try to make an argument that ought to be made in the public square or in churches.
Yeah, and let's think about what the political consequences will be for some of these Republican members in districts that are either swing districts or districts that Joe Biden won, who have cast now votes in favor of this pretty hardline position on abortion for women in the military. And I wonder, Richard Haas, we talk about the political consequences, which are considerable, we know. What are the actual are there national security repercussions if there is a failure to pass this defense authorization bill, which I think is possible when we look at the showdown coming up?
I think this national security consequences, Susan, almost whatever happens. One is, and the Rev was getting at it a little bit, one of the biggest problems facing the military right now is retention and recruitment. And women play now an increasingly central role in the American military. Things have really, really changed. I'm not sure these lawmakers maybe understand that. So to weigh in on these issues in the way they're doing really undermines readiness. Yeah, that's point one. If this bill weren't to be passed because of this, yes, I mean, we've already got a time now where the U.S. military can't do the procurement it needs to, again, is having personnel issues. If suddenly funds aren't available at this moment, and the United States, even though we're not a direct participant in Ukraine, we're, shall we say, a major indirect participant there, plus we've got operations in every other theater of the world, that would be a major, major problem. It makes it impossible to plan. It makes it that much more difficult. Let me just make one political statement. Everyone around this table has been doing these issues for a long time. We've come a long way since politics stopped at the water's edge. The idea that this becomes another football for American politics, I just think is a sign of just how much things have deteriorated.
And Richard, to that point, I mean, it was a major topic of conversation last week while overseas covering the president. I mean, the defense secretary was there talking about Senator Tuberville's blockade here. They can't fill important positions. There are jobs, there are key jobs in the military that are left vacant right now. President Biden himself, in his news conference in Helsinki, singled out the senator for what he's doing. And Brandon Buck, give us, you've worked with a couple of Republican speakers. You're well aware of the machinations and the strategy and the GOP leadership in the House, and of course weigh in on the Senate too. What are they doing here? Like, what is the thought process behind the Republican Party that's not just blocking leadership positions, but also, doing a thing that's, to Richard's point, potentially challenging American military readiness?
Well, I think it would be a mistake to say this is a part of any plan. I mean, Kevin McCarthy held that press conference on Friday after the bill passed, a bit of a pep rally for the bill, which is funny because this was something that he was trying to avoid all week long. And going back to last week, they were held up in Rules Committee for a very long time trying to sort out how to handle this. As Ali pointed out, this was a bipartisan bill just a few weeks ago. He didn't want to do this for those political reasons. He didn't want to put his members in this position. He also knows that looking down the road, this is going to come back to the House without a lot of these provisions. And once again, he's going to have to sell this to his members as a walkback. I'm a little conspiratorial, I guess, when it comes to the House Freedom Caucus and what their real motivations are. I think they like to set up a situation where the House negotiates with the Senate, doesn't get all of these more extreme provisions, and then they can put it at Kevin McCarthy's feet for not having delivered once again. I think Kevin McCarthy is facing a lot of pressure on this, and it's going to extend to when we start doing actual funding for the military. Look, we haven't failed to pass one of these authorization bills in 60 years. We don't know exactly what would happen if we didn't get one done. But we sure know that if we can't fund the military when we get to the appropriations next, that's a huge, huge problem for not just us, but lots of places around the world.
Mr. President, I rise this evening now for the 22nd time to keep unmasking the far-right scheme to capture and control our Supreme Court. This scheme is funded by creepy right-wing billionaires who stay out of the limelight and let others, namely Leonard Leo and his crew, operate their scheme. And how are they benefiting from the scheme? It's hard to track which right-wing billionaires are involved, and that is by design. But thanks to intrepid reporting from ProPublica and others, we're learning more all the time. And every day it becomes harder for the billionaire-friendly justices and their political allies to pretend with a straight face that all is kosher at the court. I have previously described the noxious cocktail of this court capture scheme: creepy right-wing billionaires, phony front groups, amenable justices, large sums of money, and secrecy. I don't know whether they take that shaken or stirred, but those seem to be the common ingredients. To chill that court capture cocktail, We can add one more ingredient, Alaskan glacier ice. But I'll get back to that later. First, let's review the origin story of Justice Samuel Alito. It begins with the bipartisan Senate rejection of Judge Robert Bork, which infuriated Bork's far-right backers. On the court were Justices Souter and Stevens, both Republican appointees, but they wouldn't help the billionaires. So the angry chant went out from the far right, no more Souters, no more Stevenses. Then President George W. Bush got an appointment and nominated his friend and trusted White House counsel, Harriet Miers. A Republican president nominates a personal friend and rock-ribbed conservative Republican, a woman, to replace Sandra Day O'Connor, and the attack on her comes from the right. The far-right billionaires wouldn't have it, and their operative, the aforementioned Leonard Leo, oversaw the project of taking her down. And in her place came the ever so reliably billionaire-friendly Sam Alito. This switch, Miers for Alito, gave Leo immense cred with the billionaires, who have since made him a very rich man and helped him launch his armada of front groups, of which this array is just a selection. These three groups are the groups from which he takes revenue for himself and through which he manages these two groups, a coordinated 501c3 and 501c4. That's sort of the latest and greatest technique in dark money political manipulation, a conjoined 501c3 and 501c4, usually common offices, common staff, common funders, common mail drop, all of that. And around this common core are what are called fictitious names. That's the name for it under Virginia law. So 85 Fund is also the Judicial Education Project under a fictitious name. It is also the Honest Elections Project under a fictitious name. It is also the Free to Learn under a fictitious name. Concord Fund is also Judicial Crisis Network under a fictitious name. Honest Elections Project Action under a fictitious name, and Free to Learn Action under a fictitious name. That's quite a lot of confusion, and it's designed to be confusing. Scroll on to 2021. By that time, I've been calling out obvious issues at the Supreme Court, published articles, delivered speeches, wrote law reviews, even wrote a book. Alito, speaking at the University of Notre Dame, bemoaned what he said were, and I quote, unprecedented efforts to intimidate the court. He went on to say that the media was suggesting that, I quote again, a dangerous cabal is deciding important issues in a novel, secretive, improper way in the middle of the night, hidden from public view. That, of course, referred to the sudden surge under Trump in the court's use of its shadow docket to quickly change the law without hearing full public arguments. Alito's speech then was considered pretty extraordinary, airing of grievance by a Supreme Court justice. In response, I wrote an op-ed explaining that Justice Alito had participated in a pattern of decisions, among them the shadow docket ruling leaving in place, pre-Dobbs, Texas's bounty hunter anti-abortion law. A pattern of big wins for big right-wing donors with little regard for fact or precedent. I argued that Americans' perception that the court lacks independence and the resulting drop in approval isn't some left-wing figment. The evidence showed a clear pattern. When big right-wing donor interests came before the court, the Federalist Society justices on the court would regularly trample precedent and contort the facts in the law to deliver the donors political victories. Not a figment, a pattern. Then, of course, came the Dobbs case, which actually took away a constitutional right from women. For 5 decades, women had the right to choose when to have children. That constitutional right appeared safely protected in Supreme Court precedent. Then, from a list mysteriously prepared by Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, President Trump appointed 3 justices to the court. Now, I say mysteriously because the Federalist Society evidently never had any formal proceedings to develop any list. But it offered no correction when Trump kept calling it his Federalist Society list. Well, the next thing you know, that constitutional right was taken away by justices who, in their confirmation hearings, had told the American public and the Senate Judiciary Committee that Roe was settled law. Settled, that is, until they had the votes to unsettle it and make up their own. As Justice Elena Kagan observed, if there's a new member of a court and all of a sudden everything is up for grabs, all of a sudden very fundamental principles of law are being overthrown or being replaced, then people have a right to say, what's going on there? That doesn't seem very law-like. And she was right. Years after he had assured us Roe was settled law, it was Justice Alito who wrote the decision in Dobbs. Alito's draft opinion infamously leaked well ahead of the decision, causing rampant speculation about who leaked the opinion and why. Chief Justice Roberts directed the marshal to investigate, interviewing clerks and support staff and even searching employees' personal phone records. But with the justices, the marshal undertook some other, also mysterious, iterative process, and the investigation proved inconclusive. Curiously, days before the opinion leaked, the Wall Street Journal editorial page had predicted the Dobbs decision, raising the suggestion that someone had a source in the court. The editorial correctly predicted what Alito knew, that Alito would write the decision for the majority so long as Chief Justice Roberts couldn't pull another justice to join a more moderate middle ground decision. Then, this past April, Justice Alito was featured in a highly sympathetic interview on the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Alito spoke about his opinions leak and said, "I personally have a pretty good idea who is responsible, but that's different from the level of proof that is needed to name somebody." Any major newspaper would have put an exclusive interview with a Supreme Court justice on the front page, but it would then have been subject to fact-checking. This opinion piece looked like an article, but it appeared in the Journal's notoriously fast and loose with the facts opinion section under a double byline. One was a Wall Street Journal editorial staffer, and the other was David Rivkin, a right-wing lawyer who represented the states challenging the EPA's Clean Power Plan before the Supreme Court. A quick detour about the Wall Street Journal editorial page's ties to the right-wing ecosystem. Right-wing bizarro land likes to ape the legitimate world. In the legitimate world, there's a Pulitzer Prize. So right-wing bizarro land has its own Bradley Prize, which, guess what, has provided hefty prize money to several Wall Street Journal editorial page writers, $1 million cash in all. This editorial piece quotes Alito saying, "We are being hammered daily and I think quite unfairly in a lot of instances, and practically nobody is defending us." In the piece, Justice Alito declined to talk about the Clarence Thomas ethics problems reported by ProPublica. Extravagant vacations worth as much as $500,000 paid for by right-wing billionaire mega donor Harlan Crow and not disclosed. That report was later followed by an additional ProPublica story detailing the billionaire's purchase of properties from Justice Thomas and his family members, also not properly disclosed, and payments for years of tuition for the justice's grandnephew who the Thomases were raising, also not disclosed. Justice Alito's silence on the Thomas bombshell became all the more notable when 2 months later, ProPublica published another bombshell. This one about Justice Alito. Same cocktail ingredients. In this case, a right-wing billionaire, an amenable justice, undisclosed private jet travel, an exotic vacation, all very expensive, all secret. Justice Alito's private jet travel to this all expenses paid Alaskan fishing vacation was paid for by a hedge fund billionaire, Paul Singer, who contributed over $80 million to Republican political organizations and whose Elliott Management Group is one of the largest donors to the National Republican Senatorial Committee. This is a politically involved right-wing billionaire. Later, the billionaire's firm had business before the court, and in that case, won billions of dollars. No disclosure by Alito, no recusal. Charles Gay, an Indiana University law professor and leading expert on recusals, had this to say: if you were good friends, what were you doing ruling on his case? And if you weren't good friends, what were you doing accepting this? But wait, there's more. The tab for Alito's stay at the Salmon Lodge in Alaska was covered by a different billionaire. If you're keeping score, we're now up to 3 billionaires. This one is named Robin Arkley, and he funded the launch of Leonard Leo's advocacy group, the Judicial Crisis Network, also heavily engaged in right-wing political influence focused on the court. Leo, the operative behind the current right-wing Supreme Court supermajority, not only organized Alito's trip, he gallivanted off to Alaska with the justice and the billionaires. By my count, after yet another story about Justice Thomas, we are now up to 6 right-wing billionaires attending to the care and feeding of 2 justices, Thomas and Alito. And there are all sorts of links among them and with the ubiquitous Leonard Leo. So many justices, so many billionaires, so many gifts. But there's even more. Alito was not the first justice to stay at this particular lodge. Justice Scalia also took a private jet to the lodge, courtesy of billionaire Arkley, and also did not disclose the gift. In one memorable bit of color from that ProPublica story, Scalia was described as mixing martinis made with ice chipped off of a glacier. There, you thought I'd forgot that, but I didn't. The evening before the Alito billionaire travel story ran, the Wall Street Journal comes back into the picture again. Alito tried to preempt ProPublica's reporting by taking to the Wall Street Journal editorial page. In the op-ed, Alito argued that he didn't need to disclose the private jet travel under federal law because the private jet should be considered a facility, and that his seat on the private jet would have otherwise been empty, so it was free and there was no gift. I won't go into how laughable these arguments are. That is a separate case. What's important is that these arguments were printed on the Wall Street Journal editorial page without investigation or comment by the page. taken at face value. Oh, and by the way, the cost of that charter, the private jet travel would have cost over $100,000 each way. In that Wall Street Journal editorial page piece from the spring, Alito had said about the court's collapsing approval, well, yeah, what do you expect when you're day in and day out? They're illegitimate. They're engaging in all sorts of unethical conduct. They're doing this. They're doing that. Justice Alito's complaining has it completely backwards. The problem is not that Americans are pointing out the ethical lapses at the Supreme Court. The problem is the ethical lapses at the Supreme Court. The Roberts Court justices' behavior is crashing public trust in the institution, and justifiably. First, with preposterous judicial behavior that no other judge would indulge. Second, with outrageous violations of quite clear rules and procedures judges are supposed to follow about reporting those gifts. Third, with preposterous excuses for the bad behavior and the reporting violations. And fourth, with no process to ever even try to get to the truth, to establish the facts. It is a mess. Ideally, the justices would start fixing that mess on their own. The court and the Judicial Conference, which Roberts chairs, have the ability to fix this. But so far, they won't. I suspect there is a lot more to be found out about this mess, and they don't want those further disclosures, so they would just as soon pull a rug over the whole thing. But that won't work. Congress also has the ability to write ethics rules for the justices. Remember, Congress created the judges' financial disclosure requirements in the Ethics in Government Act. And Congress created the judicial recusal law, which the justices are also required to follow. And Congress created the Judicial Conference, which administers financial disclosure and code of conduct matters. Clearly, the Article I legislative branch can legislate in this area. Clearly, we can oversee agencies that we have created and laws that we have passed, and indeed we have for decades. In the coming days, the Senate Judiciary Committee will mark up my Supreme Court Ethics Recusal and Transparency Act. This is a very important step forward in this process, and I thank Chairman Durbin for his leadership. This bill would put basic ethics guardrails and transparency measures in place to help ensure the American people that they can get a fair shot at the Supreme Court, even if they don't have a private jet. Today, in the court that dark money built, the honors system has flagrantly failed. We need to legislate, we need to investigate, and we need to fix this mess for the American people. To be continued, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, strap in for a raunchy ride. While the formula for Joyride is familiar, a buddy road trip comedy featuring a group of mismatched friends, Joyride is still a first. A mainstream comedy written, directed, and starring Asian American women. Featuring Ashley Park, best known for her work as Emily in Paris, Joyride is about a Type A attorney who's visiting China for the first time after being adopted as a baby by a white couple in the Pacific Northwest. Park's character Audrey is going to her native land to close a business deal for her law firm that could make or break her career. Since her Mandarin is practically non-existent, she brings along her slackerish, artist best friend Lolo to be her interpreter, along with Lolo's tag-along cousin Deadeye. Upon arrival in China, the trio meets up with Audrey's former college roommate Kat, played by Oscar nominee Stephanie Chu. Hijinks then ensue with the quartet's adventures going well beyond Audrey's attempts to close the deal. It'd be a spoiler to disclose the things they get up to, but it's safe to say it's the type of raunch usually reserved for male buddy movies. In addition to portraying Asian American women beyond the usual stereotypes, the movie also takes a surprisingly touching and poignant turn in dealing with themes of identity and belonging and the conflict many foreign-born adoptees feel between their cultural heritage and the culture in which they were raised. While Park is fine as Audrey, the real scene stealer is Sherry Cola, who shines in her role as Lolo. Cola has phenomenal comedic timing and the ability to give her character depth while avoiding caricature. A good break from summer blockbusters, Joyride's a ride that anyone with a sense of humor will enjoy. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and beat us back on our channel on YouTube.
A book goes home. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The book's author was James Clerk Maxwell, not exactly a household name. And the book, titled An Elementary Treatise on Electricity, well, never exactly topped a bestseller list. Not surprising, since the book is, as the New York Times story put it, crammed with technical jargon and mathematical equations. The book was published in 1881, and the New Bedford, Massachusetts Public Library acquired a copy in 1882. So far, so good. But after being checked out in 1905, it wasn't returned. Fast forward 118 years to May 2023, when the Massachusetts Library received a note from the rare books curator at the West Virginia University Library that read, "We have recently received a donation that included a book from your library. Would you like it returned?" The answer was yes, and it was. And yes, we were concerned about late fees too. They were a penny a day in 1905 when the book was checked out, so they could have been over $400. Fortunately, decades ago, late fees were capped at $2. This is indeed a feel-good story. What we can feel even better about is a 2023 news story about a library that, for a change, isn't about censors trying to pull a book off the shelf, but rather about a book going home. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. The Teamster members of Local 574 in Minneapolis were back out on strike. Their strike had begun 2 months prior on May 16th. The striking Teamsters had effectively shut down much of the commercial transportation in the city. One exception was made for some farmers, who were allowed to bring their produce to market. The powerful Citizens Alliance, created to oppose and destroy unions, tried to defeat the strike. The police clashed violently with the strikers, who tried to keep scab drivers from breaking through their picket lines. As the strike entered its second week, other unions began to strike in support of the Teamsters. Clashes between the police and workers intensified. Minneapolis labor leaders sat down with the police and proposed a truce. The governor of Minnesota, Floyd Olson, helped to arbitrate an agreement. The Teamsters won union recognition and the right for all strikers to return to work, as well as a system of recognizing seniority. On May 25th, they called off the strike and went back to work. But soon the employers began to backpedal on the agreement. They claimed that the negotiations did not include the workers inside warehouses and only covered those who drove and unloaded vehicles. Angered, the Teamsters went back out on strike. Soon, violent clashes between the picketers and police broke out again. 2 workers were shot in the back and killed. The governor declared martial law and sent in the National Guard to restore order. A federal mediator brokered another settlement meeting the major demands of the union. It was a major victory for the Teamsters and a major victory for the workers of Minneapolis and beyond. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yes, indeed, we are here at the chef's table. And it is River City Hash Mondays, and we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 63 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs a bit cooler than what we've had. Looks like we are only going to get around 90 degrees, and we've been considerably warmer than that. We have moved to an active red flag warning, which means we are in high fire danger, and to get a go bag and make sure we know where we're going and how we're going to get there. So have a few escape routes, because you never know. You never know. Looks like we'll have sunny conditions throughout the day with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the mid to upper 50s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And sunny skies tomorrow with highs in the low to mid 90s with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Now, grass pollen, of course, remains the predominant pollen here in our little town of Rogue River, and it is rated high. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 23 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains very high at level 9, so do take care if you see that number. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.09 inches, expected to fall dramatically in about an hour or so. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 62% and falling. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's the Weather Underground. London is 74 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 78 and sunny. Rome is 98 and fair with a heat advisory that could impact critical electrical infrastructure. Kyiv is 88 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 78 and clear. Hong Kong is 84 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 86 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 48 and clear. San Francisco, California is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 85 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Britain's Health Security Agency said that measles vaccination rates in parts of London have dropped so low that the capital could see tens of thousands of cases of the rash-causing disease unless immunization coverage is quickly boosted. In a statement, the agency said that among some groups of children in London, fewer than 70% have received their first dose of the standard measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. 2 doses are needed to provide full protection. Measles is among the world's most infectious diseases, and health experts estimate that about 95% of the population must be immunized to stop new outbreaks. The Health Security Agency said that although the risk of an outbreak across the UK was low, the current levels of immunization in London suggest that a measles outbreak of between 40,000 and 160,000 cases could occur in the capital. As of June 30th, there have been 128 cases of measles in Britain this year versus 54 cases last year. More than 60% of the cases in 2023 have been in London. Britain's National Health Service said it is starting a targeted national campaign to boost measles vaccination in communities with the lowest coverage rates. UK officials said people aged 19 to 25 were at particularly high risk of catching measles, noting that many of them may have missed vaccinations following spurious allegations made by British physician Andrew Wakefield in 1998 that the MMR vaccine was linked to autism. The research was later discredited, and Wakefield was barred by medical authorities for misconduct, but he seeded an anti-vaccination movement that damaged immunization rates in the UK and beyond for years. Globally, measles immunization rates have dropped substantially in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. The World Health Organization warned last November that about 40 million children in the world missed a measles vaccine dose in 2021. In Europe, WHO noted that cases have jumped in some countries, including Russia, Austria, Serbia, and the UK this year. Measles is an airborne disease and typically causes a cough, red eyes, and a facial rash. Serious complications are mostly seen in children under 5 and adults over 30 and include blindness, encephalitis, and pneumonia.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the Associated Press bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The man who said he would burn the Torah and the Bible outside the Israeli embassy in Stockholm gave up his plan and instead held a one-person demonstration against the burning of holy books. At the scene, he said he was a Muslim and threw a lighter he held in his hand to the ground, saying he never intended to burn holy books. The man, who is in his 30s and had been issued a permit for the protest by Stockholm police, said such an action would be against the Quran and that he will not burn any books. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.